All right, everybody, stay tuned for another quick update on the 108. We're going to talk about the fuel system, a couple other components we took out of the airplane, and also why we do all this. So stay tuned. All right, everybody, Paul Stecewycz here, Weeks Aircraft, doing another Mechanics Corner and an update on the 108 project. We're going to talk about basically just the fuel system on this aircraft, and we decided, of course, to remove the tanks out of the airplane because we want to check the condition of the tanks. We also want to check the condition of the tank wells where the tanks actually sit. And of course, like everything else on this lovely project, as we pulled the tanks out, we found problems. But basically what we're looking at here in front of me is the fuel system. It has a main tank right here, which is in the back of the airplane. This holds 60 liters, which is 15.85 gallons. And then in each wing root area, you have a trailing or back rear tank, and these are both 32 liters, which is 8.45 gallons. And then up front, you have two more tanks, which are 12.5 gallons each. So the total capacity of this airplane is around like 60 gallons, which isn't a whole lot. And that's one of the issues they've had. And that's why they added a tank to the, one of the earlier episodes going way back, we talked about the added tank that was in the baggage compartment. We actually found out from a relative of Ottawa's that one of the reasons that tank was put in there was that one of the previous owners of the airplane got married, and they wanted a honeymoon in Brazil, and the airplane did not have the range to go to Brazil from Chile, so they added the tank. So that's why that tank was put in the airplane, so it's pretty cool. But we took the tanks out of the airplane, and unfortunately, they have some issues. The first thing we notice is that 3 of the tanks have kind of like a caved in, if we look at these on the top, like they're caved in a little bit. This one also, and it's kind of strange because it almost looks like the tanks were like run dry, and then it was like starting to suck the tank inwards. Now this should not happen because if the tank is vented to the atmosphere, that wouldn't happen, but it actually almost looks like that's what happened, which is kind of strange. So we can't quite figure out why that is going on. The only good tank, there's 2 good tanks, and that's the main tank, which we talked about here, came out. It's pretty good. But one interesting note about this tank is they added this little fitting. It's actually a little AN fitting that they welded up inside of where the filler neck is. Now, I'm not quite sure what this is here for, but after thinking about it for a while, I kind of thought maybe they put this here so they could pressure fuel the airplane, because we talked about in earlier episodes that you have to fuel everything through this tank and it all trickles down to the other 4 tanks. Well, maybe they were trying to speed this process up. They would cap this closed. They put a hose connection on here, run that down through the bottom of the airplane because there was an extra hole in the baggage compartment, and they probably attached a fuel pump to it, and they forced all the fuel into the tanks, and maybe that sped up the process. That's the only thing I could think. But other than that, that tank is good. The right rear tank is perfect. But then you get into some of the other tanks and not so much. Again, this one has the caved in portion. It has a big dent. I'm not even sure how that got there. A big dent on the side right here. That kind of got crushed in there. And this tank here also had some of this. I think this actually was caused by the ground looping accident, because this got damaged and somebody actually cut this all out and they welded in a whole new threaded hole here for the fitting, and then you can see how lovely that was done. You can also see dented, there's dents on the back of it. And then the last tank on the left-hand side also, same thing going on. I mean, it's like, I don't know what they did to this thing. It's like it got dropped and ran over. So 3 of the tanks have some issues. Now, these can be repaired. Probably the best bet is to cut open one side of all these tanks, knock it all out, because this is pretty soft material, and then weld it back together again. That's an option. We're going to start to look and see if there's somebody out there that has some other tanks, because I am locating some parts. I did make contact with a group in France that is actually hopefully getting us a set of flaps for the airplane. So we're going to look for tanks also before we get into that. But it's just kind of a shame that all this happened to the airplane. But we're going to fix all of it as we go along here. Now, also the fuel system on this airplane, all these tanks are interconnected to each other through a series of brass pipes and fittings, all kinds of strange things. to this day, as long as I've been working on this airplane, I have yet to figure out how this fuel system works. It is the strangest thing. It's got a selector that sits between the pilot and co-pilot seats, and you select from different tanks, from reserve to different capacities of each tank. And I've studied this for a while, and I still have not figured it all out. But we're going to have to look at it a little bit closer and show it to some other people and see if they can figure out how this whole thing works. But basically, that's the tank system there. Now, another reason we took all these out was to check the condition inside the tank bays, because we want to check for damage, because of course we know of the ground loop accident. We also want to check for corrosion, and the main spar of the wing of the aircraft goes through the tank bay. So let's go take a look at that. All right, here we are on the right-hand side of the 108 fuselage. You can see here the two tank bay areas. The tanks fit in here very, very tight. In fact, before you actually remove the tanks out of the area here, you have to remove the fittings first, which was pretty tough. They were some of those fittings were glued in there pretty well, and they were hard to get to. So we struggled with that for about a day and a half, 2 days, just to get the fittings off so we can pull the tanks out. And what you see here is just the openings. Each tank is held in with a strap that goes across it, then tightens down inside. That keeps the tank nice and snug. They had some extra padding in the bottom of the tanks. I don't believe that was original. I think they probably just had maybe some rubber strips or some small cushioning in there. But the people down in Chile who did the overhaul of this airplane had wrapped the tank in like these big, thick felt blankets. None of that is original. So that's all coming out. But what we're looking for here is, of course, the condition of this area. Looking for corrosion. We've removed a lot of the paint out of here. They've had the tanks out once before, and the original paint actually was stripped out, and they had sprayed some like zinc chromate primer in here, so that's coming off pretty easy. Not finding any corrosion, not finding any damage. This is the main spar that carries through. You can see where the wing attached fittings are right here, so we want to check, of course, the condition of these angles, looking for cracks, looking for corrosion, and anything else. There were some small repairs done up front in this area. This was also probably from the ground loop, but the repairs are actually pretty decent. We're probably going to leave those. But overall, pretty happy with the way this looks. We haven't had a chance to go to the other side yet. The other side's still all painted inside, but that's probably the next thing after we clean up this side, is to go to that side and get all the old paint and inspect that area. All right, one of the other things we kind of wanted to show here is it's interesting how they actually folded the wings on this airplane. All the civilian 108s had folding wings, and you would pull a pin, the wing would come out, the pins would come out of these fittings that actually held the wing in place, and then the wing actually is pulled out and pivoted and then swung back to the tail and pinned. And I always wonder, well, they're using the flap drive as the pivot point, but how does the wing actually get far enough away to where you can actually pivot away from the fittings? And I was actually, when I took all this apart, I was looking at this like, well, this is right here is the flap drive attachment. I'm like, well, there's no way you can actually get that away and give you enough room to do that. But after I started messing with it, the whole thing is telescopic. It pulls out, and that gives you the clearance to take it. And then at that point, this all pivots, and you can just turn the wing flat against the fuselage and pin it to the tail. So pretty genius. Again, like everything else on the 108, clever is the definition of this airplane. All right, everybody. We mentioned earlier, I think in one of the other videos, that we decided to send the surviving members of Otto Wise's family that are still down in Chile one of the fabric pieces off of the rudder. The rudder fabric was actually in pretty good shape, and it actually had Otto Wise's name on it, and it had this town of Osorno where he's from. So we thought it'd be a nice gesture to remove that and send it to the family. And they just recently received it, and we got a picture here of all the surviving members. I'm not sure who everybody is there holding that piece of fabric, so it's pretty cool to see that, and they're all pretty happy. I think it was actually given as a birthday gift to Otto Wise's son, and I believe it's generally, I think maybe that's him, the older guy. And then in return, they sent me a photograph, and this is the first time I've actually seen this. They sent me a photograph of Otto himself in the airplane. This is the first time I've actually seen a picture of Otto and especially while I was sitting in the airplane. I think this picture was taken probably 47, 48. This is after the major overhaul that was done to it. I can just tell by looking at it. This is the paint scheme. This is the next to the last paint scheme that was put on the airplane. And there he is right there. So we finally have an idea of what the guy looks like. So it's pretty cool to see that. And I'm sure the family's happy to receive that. And hopefully they frame it and they put it in their house as a memento to their father and grandfather. Last thing we're going to talk about in some of the other episodes, we talked about, of course, how you learn how to do this, how I learned how to do it, with this kind of the skills and some of the things it takes to do restoration. But one of the things I wanted to touch on this whole thing is why we do this. Now, of course, a lot of people say, well, you do it for reasons like, this is quite the common reasons, of course, we do it to preserve history and to honor the men and women that flew these airplanes and to pass on the skills of restoration and how these airplanes were built. And all that is true, don't get me wrong. But for some reason, as through my whole career, that never quite answered the question for me personally as to why I do this. Because, why do people do this? You spend all this time, people like Kermit Weeks and other people around the world spend millions of dollars and spend just tons and tons of time and hire people to build these airplanes. So why do we do this? Well, my answer came a number of years ago. We were actually flying the B-25 back from California. We had stopped at the Commemorative Air Show in Texas, and we were there for a few days flying the show. And one of the things we did there was they had like a dinner for all the participants of the show. And I was at this dinner. Kermit invited me, and I went there, and I was sitting there having a nice meal. And they had guest speakers that got up and they talked about certain things. And this colonel got up. I don't even remember this guy's name. He was somebody that was in the Air Force for many years. And he starts his little talk and he's asked the same question. Why do we all do this? And so I got kind of perked up because I wasn't really paying attention. I was enjoying my meal. And I was like, wait a minute, I want to listen to this guy. And he answered the question for me. And he said, the reason that we do this is because we wish we were there. That answers the question. It's basically like time traveling because we want to see how the airplanes were built. We wish we were there when they built the airplanes, when they designed them, when they were in service. We wish that sometimes we could have flown the airplanes. And I think that's why we do this, is because we want to know what it's like to be there. And because we can't, this is our substitute for it. So that's how I look at it. And it's kind of a strange thing, but that answers the question for me. I think it's probably different for other people, but that's how I feel about the whole thing. So that's about it for that. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Going to hopefully do another update here in another month or so, and hopefully make some more progress on the 108.